Hello and welcome back. Um, if you've been on this channel before, you know I talk a lot about narcissistic abuse. I've been trying to stop talking about that, but unfortunately, it's following me wherever I go. And I'm starting to realize that this is just part of the calling of my life. Because once you've seen something, you just can't unsee it. And that brings me to the point of this video. In recent weeks, I've been listening to a particular podcast that goes live every day. And a lot of the people that come on there to ask questions and ask for advice and all of that have similar situations. Now, when you've been through narcissistic abuse and you know what it's like and you know what those people are like, you notice red flags literally through a conversation. And so many of the people on this podcast that I listen to every day talk about their relationships. And within maybe 30 seconds of the things that they say, my alarm bells are going off. And the reason why is there are nuances that only those of us who have really studied these personality types, who've experienced it, pick up easily. And why this stands out to me and why I felt it was important to talk about was because I'm starting to realize that so many of us, there's at the moment an entire nation who are so shrouded in confusion and deceit that they cannot see anything clearly. They focus on what they think is good and it makes them ignore the 80% of what is actually going on behind the scenes. And this is so classic of narcissistic relationships. It is so easy to miss all the bad things really going on, what effect it's having on you in all areas of your life, because you're focusing on the good things and hoping the good things are actually going to translate to the other areas of your so-called relationship or family system or whatever the case may be. But the truth of the matter is, those of us who've been through these experiences know early on in these conversations that your best bet is to run. Obviously, you can't tell that to someone. Obviously, you have to be empathetic for their situation. A lot of the time, when someone is explaining the experience to you, they are grieving, they're going through pain, and they're sitting in the biggest hope that something, anything, is going to change. And for a long time, I've been sitting with people and speaking to them through these situations and being like, look, I know you are hoping that things are going to change, but I have to be honest with you. The chances are high that they won't, because you've had repetitive situations happen year in and year out. And I'm very wary to come out and say, look, leave, right? Because most people don't respond to that. They want you to know that you've been with them, that you understand where they are, that you need to sit with them and have empathy for them. And I totally get it. I try to do it as much as I possibly can, but sometimes it's frustrating to watch people repeat the same story over and over again, because what you must know is that these relationship types, these narcissistic people, are copy and paste. They are identical. They are like one another almost down to a T. I can tell a narcissistic relationship basically because I've been through one, and basically because I've spoken to tons of people who have had almost identical experiences to what I have. Yes, there are different types of narcissists, but they all operate under the same sentiments. Um, and it's heartbreaking for me to listen to these people cry and mourn and moan and hope, because I know from someone who's been there that when you sit in that for so long, you're actually giving the narcissist time to come up with a strategy. And that strategy is usually to find ways to destroy you in some or other area of your life, if not all of it. Because they need to get revenge for the fact that you are not staying who they want you to be, and you are not conforming to who they want you to become, to serve all of their needs. I found myself listening to this podcast and sometimes getting utterly frustrated, and not because of the host's patience. Man, this man manages these people in such a beautiful way. He is so wholesome, so open to them. He does 100 times better than I think anyone I've ever seen in these situations. And then I also sit and wonder to myself, should we be putting systems in place where we are giving people the actual, studied, written on, educational information in their hands for them to read and make a concise decision on their own prior to them even having an opportunity to walk into these relationships? Every day I wonder to myself how we can make that possible, because the doing it on the other side, when they are really going through the trauma, when they've already experienced years of pain and coercion and confusion and gaslighting, their brains are so conformed and to the design of the relationship that everything feels much tougher. And knowing from my own experience, the first few years are just wound up in trying to untangle from the things that happened to you, from the things that were said to you, to the belief systems that were basically handed to you on a silver platter and you received because you hoped that receiving it was going to help make your relationship better, when in fact, receiving it just turned you into a slave to the narcissist. Exactly what it is they need: someone who will protect them, who will hide all of their secrets, will not check in on what is true or not, that will make you feel like you are less than human being, and that will try and control you with outbursts when you feel like you need to distance yourself or actually create boundaries for yourself. I've often wondered how this can be taught to people beforehand, because it's exhausting for me to over and over hear the same stories over and over again, and it's not those people's fault. We get into these relationships by default because of our empathetic nature. We fall into these relationships because we think we can help this person become better. We think we can actually elevate them in their lives, when in actual fact they've walked in with a strategy of how they're going to use us to benefit themselves, while at the same time both bullying us and taking away our complete autonomy and our sense of identity. It is a scary prospect to recognize that so many people, and I'm talking men and women, are at this very moment caught in really treacherous situations. And on the men's end, they can't call it abuse because they feel responsible for what's going on. And for the woman's end, they are so emotionally tied up and so trauma bonded that leaving physically hurts in the body. And then you have the guilt and the shame and all of the extra things that are added on top of it. One of the things that I often wonder, I think that is even more, um, even scarier to me, is how this is handled in the church. Because there's one thing to have marriage counseling, that's all great and well. But I always wonder in marriage counseling, what are we actually trying to figure out here? We're sitting and having a conversation with these people. We're trying to identify if they're ready for marriage. These people have usually already set a wedding date. They've already prepared themselves for what marriage is going to look like in their heads, which is idealistic, to be true, to be honest. But are we actually trying to identify whether there is a harmful person in this relationship, how to navigate through that, and when is the right time to say to the person who's going to be harmed that this is not a good fit for you? The choice then is on them. Most of the time, they make their choices regardless. But I, I really sit and wonder every single day in a ministry context. And I say this because I've been through counseling through church much of my life, and I've seen this play out in every single one of those events, to be honest with you. It's only in recent years with the ministry that I'm in right now where that doesn't happen. But I've seen this play out where, because we still live in a very patriarchal society, um, women are not believed, and we are often seen as emotional and sort of blowing things out of proportion, and what we are saying is not being taken into account. And this is where the education comes in, because there are terms, there are words, there are behaviors, there are certain outbursts that you can read, and you can read them based on whether they are self-serving or whether they are triggers. Most people I've seen who do this kind of counseling in ministry specifically don't seem to have the ability to identify this, and are just like, no, we're going to go through the counseling and tell you what you need to know, instead of, let's pick apart your relationship. Why do you want to get married? What are the purposes of the marriage? What do you see it's going to look like? And then dig into these people's history. Go so deep that you find triggers. You need to find triggers so that you can tell them what they need to heal, because those things will impact the relationship. And then based on how much action they take, right? Because if they want to get married, they have to start doing the work. Marriage is a mirror to your face. It will show you who you are, a version of yourself you didn't know. So they need to be identifying triggers and then observing whether these people actually take the initiative to do the work on those triggers and their healing and come to the realizations that they need to, because those triggers and those pains and past hurts and childhood trauma exists for a reason. Whether if those people take the initiative, that means they would be able to manage a marriage the way that it is required to be managed. But most of the time, I don't see, and I mean, I can be corrected. Literally, you can correct me in the comments. But I don't ever see this happening. I very rarely seen couples being taken and splitting their lives separately and what their relationship is going to look like, whether their marriage is based on a decision from their past, or what they want the future to look like, or what they're trying to counteract in their family system, or they don't want to be like this parent, or they want to be this kind of person. Breaking all of those things down and coming down to their belief systems. Because if that is done accurately, with the information, with the education, and with the language, then it's very easy to identify when someone is unable and unwilling to do the work, because what they will intrinsically do when you are trying to get into the meat of the information or the meat of the things that they haven't dealt with yet, they will generally either verbally attack you, gaslight you, leave the room, or talk about you to other people. And that is a very, very clear sign that that person should not be getting married, because what's going to happen is the same things that they do to you is going to happen to their partner 10 times over. And all of these things are just on my mind because I feel like the conversation around narcissism and abuse is so cluttered in mixed and messed up information. It is not clear to people because we all believe everybody's intrinsically good. I say this all the time. And the fact of the matter is, it isn't true. There are a lot of factors involved in narcissistic behavior, and I'll get into that sometime, because there is a spiritual element that in the last few months I've done more research on that is actually pretty interesting. But when we talk about practicality, if you allow someone to go into a marriage and they don't know there's clarity they're supposed to get, that you haven't helped them get yet, they will walk into something blindly, and a year later, and in some cases, most people in these relationships, they say everything was great until they got married and then everything shifted. You're not helping them see that that's coming. At least, even if they choose still to get married, at least if you've helped them identify how to clear up what is true and what isn't true about the person they're marrying, it helps them make sound choices earlier after that marriage. Because the worst thing I think about abusive relationships and narcissistic relationships is the damage that is created the longer you stay in them. If it's a short period of time, you can learn your lessons in a hurry, get out, get yourself sorted, and not end up in a destructive situation. But the longer you're stuck in it, the more decisions you make in that person's favor, and you completely disregard yourself as an entire autonomous person. Ministry, from what I've seen in my perspective, and I'm going to specifically talk about ministry in colored areas in South Africa, don't want to deal with the education part of this. We are telling women and men who are in these situations that they must pray about it and it's all going to be good, and they must wait for an answer on God, and I mean, all of that is good and great, but we're also not telling them these are the things you need to look out for that might be toxic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We are also not telling them that you need to have autonomy. I remember having a conversation with a pastor once. I'd watched a video that spoke about what having autonomy in a marriage should look like, because for a very long time I had felt completely absorbed into my marriage, and I had no identity as a person. And the things that he said to me really shook me, because at that point I realized the church is not willing to have this conversation. We just want to say people have been married for 50 years, but we don't want to talk about what that marriage has actually been for the people in that marriage. Like, we don't want to talk about the details of what's going on. We don't want to talk about how much one or other person in the marriage may have suffered for most of the marriage, because the badge is they've been there 50 years. So we all want to do that. I don't want to be married 50 years and be miserable. I want to be married for 50 years and know we are both doing our work. We have both worked on ourselves. We are both doing everything we can every day to make this the best marriage we've ever had. But that has been ignored for so many years. There's so many boomers who are still today in marriages who have been horrible, but they've conformed so much to the system because the church and ministry does not allow for you to have autonomy. Women are told that submission is the same as giving up your identity. They are two completely different things. So, what he said to me in that conversation was, what is this nonsense about autonomy? We are supposed to be one. How can you have autonomy in a marriage? And I sat back and I thought to myself, this is exactly why I'm still here. I am here because everybody that surrounds me is telling me that I need to work harder. At that point, I'd been hospitalized already because I was working so hard because I was doing all the work by myself. And I had to consider my mental health in that space. You know, most people are in the same situation. So, I don't know, I just wanted to get those thoughts off my mind. I am working on a couple of things myself to try and get that information and education into the right places and at the right time, and try to speak to the right people, because these conversations need to start happening now. With the amounts of gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa, we need to get into this conversation immediately. Like, yesterday is too late, right? But we need to stop making this oh, he changed, now he's abusing me. No, he's been like that. You just don't know it because nobody has had the information and education to tell you this is a red flag, that's a red flag, that's a red flag. You need to step away before it gets bad. Nobody has had that education. Our family systems are all conformed to this behavior in South Africa because we're so used to witnessing abuse, especially in the non-white communities, that it has become part of what we are used to. So we just marry into the same situations because it is very difficult for us to break away from something we don't know. It makes it so easy for narcissistic people to continually use us because we already come from systems that tell us that this is normal. We've normalized really bad abusive behavior in our families, in our homes, and in our communities. And women never realize that they are living in abusive situations because this is all they've ever known. So I don't need to be happy, I just need to stay married, is the consensus at the end of the day. And I don't think God is evil and wants that for you. I do not think that. I do not think that. Marriage is supposed to be good and wholesome and beautiful, and it's supposed to inspire you to be all that you were designed to be. It's supposed to inspire you to seek God in amazing ways. It's supposed to inspire you to become your best creative self and find your femininity as a woman and find your masculinity as a man. But we are not teaching this. So you can let me know in the comments what you think. But the more and more I'm hearing these same conversations over and over again, I want to jump through those screens and through the phone and be like, let me show you how you ended up here. You don't even have to tell me your story. Let me show you how you ended up here, and let me show you what they've been doing this whole time. Because you are sitting in a situation now where you are heartbroken and you want to leave, but at the same time you want him to leave, or you want something to change so that your relationship can get better, so you keep holding on, when in all this time you're wasting trying to figure all that out. They are strategically ticking off how crazy they're going to make you, and at the same time creating other things that you are not seeing to sabotage you when you eventually get the strength to leave. Already planting stories in other people's minds, already telling different versions of stories, already gathering documentation and moving money and whispering in your child's ear stories about you that are not true, creating an entire narrative about who you are because it protects them when you leave. You are giving them time. So you have to figure out who they are quickly, get out quickly so that you can find your healing and start to see clearly. I say to people all the time, there's a point when it feels like an entire veil has come off your face, but it only happens to the people who really seek this information. I know too many people who've gotten out of these relationships who go back, and they go back, not only go back to this person, but have attract the same person again, because they haven't actually done the investigation on why they attract these people, where that comes from, and also understanding these personality types and recognizing red flags. They just go from one system to the next because it's familiar. And although he's acting completely different than my ex, but he's the same, because you marry him and all of the things will come up again. We have to be really, really particular about healing, really, really particular about growth, and really, really particular about educating ourselves on what we need to unlearn so that we don't relive a past that has both damaged and tried to destroy us. And unless we become very clear on what that looks like, remove the veil in front of our eyes, we're wasting our entire lives attaching ourselves to people who are going out of their way to make sure they drain everything out of us. And each and every one of us deserve more than that. So yeah, that's me.